Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Adams, and I'm the president and the founder of Balancing Act. We are delighted to have you join us. This is a different and new kind of event for us. We've been doing budget simulations since 2015, actually 2007, if you count our very earliest ones for the state of Colorado. But in the last 18 months or 2 years, we've really been focusing on some different uses, some different issues, and some different tools. And we're in some ways, we're sort of reframing how we try to provide tools that are in service of the public sector, from just focusing on budget simulation, which we think is critically important to have people have a chance to understand what government's spending money on, and then to provide input on various choices that are being made, trade-offs, and also to understand the revenue side. But we've also expanded that to a new type of tool that some of you are familiar with, but some of you are probably not. As well as focusing on some other key issues that government is faced with. So the setup for this particular series of webinars is that today we're going to do a bit of an overview on the sort of the state of these simulation-based public engagement tools and even stakeholder engagement tools. Because one thing we're going to focus on today is using the tools internally with staff, and we've got a great expert speaker to talk a little bit about that, but also looking at some issues. And so we have been rapidly finding ourselves pulled into housing discussions. Housing is one of the biggest issues, the most important, challenging issues in the country right now. 86% of Americans say that affordable housing or housing affordability is a key issue for them. And often it's one of the things that prevents it from happening is an unproductive public engagement process. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and we've actually built some tools and have some things to share with you about that. And then we're also looking at climate change, and this is one that in some ways I think it's a concern for a lot of people, but it's one that that I sort of felt personally drawn to try to do something about. Many of us on the staff here live in Colorado, and there were those terrible fires, the Plains fires along the Front Range that happened during the last few days of December, and that was just something that had never really happened before, a fire like that at that time of year. And it really made me start to think, could our tools be used to help with that issue? And we've got some nice ways that we found to do that, and we're partnering with an organization that helps local governments to do local government climate action plans. So we're going to show you some of those tools today. So let me get started with the slideshow here. This is kind of the team. Well, I'll introduce the guest speakers in just a moment, but the two people that will be mostly speaking today from the Balancing Act side are myself and Garrett Hernandez-Reimer, and this is just a little bit about us. I'm going to keep on going through this, and this is about you. We had really a wonderful response. In some cases, we've got multiple participants from each organization, and it's just this really nice mix of existing clients and new ones that I think are curious about what simulation-based public engagement looks like. Some of them might have come because they care mostly about budget. Some of them might have, because it's about climate. Some of them about housing. All of those things are okay. And really, what we've been trying to do is to try to have some of the same base code, the basic software that we have and the basic types of interactions that we're trying to structure, and to then sort of pursue those out a little bit so that they actually go that last mile to helping local governments to meet the specific public policy and public engagement challenges, and as I said, sometimes internal stakeholder challenges that are really critical to having success and helping these big important issues of government to move through the government process, to keep faith with the public, to engage them appropriately, and to hopefully have directions that are generally agreed to, so that you don't have the restiveness that we've seen about some issues over the last few years. Agenda for today is I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing, kind of this slightly new approach that we're taking, where we're looking a little bit more broadly and differently at public engagement. As I said, sort of simulation-based public engagement that's not just about the budget, using some new tools. And then we've got two absolutely terrific guest speakers. We've got Zach Wolf, who is formerly at Maricopa County, and then after that, he was a budget director at Marion, Iowa, and he has been sort of a part of the Balancing Act conversation now for about 7 years, and we're just really starting to have an opportunity to work more with him and to understand, get some insights for him about how this looks from inside the profession. And he's got some great thoughts on that, especially about using the tool internally to help ease some of that friction, but then also externally as well. It's like sort of what kind of a conversation do you actually want to have with the public? And then we've got Dave Driscoll, who is a very distinguished public servant. He's held senior positions in many governments, including City of Boulder, Colorado, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington. And in some ways, he's, I think some would consider him to be the dean of public engagement when it comes to housing. He has written a book on this and has been a terrific advisor to us. And so he'll be sharing some of his ideas on housing, but he is also a well-known leader when it comes to local government sustainability and climate action plans. So he's going to touch upon that a little bit as well. That's the least developed of our new direction areas, but we're still learning about how to do that. It's been, I think, a fun thing for us to learn about and to begin to bring some people in on. And then after that, Garrett Hernandez Reimer will be sort of just sharing, I sometimes with technology, you say, oh, that looks really great. And it also looks really hard to build. We're not going to get deep underneath the hood today, but we're also just going to show you kind of what this looks like, just to kind of demystify it a little bit. And so he'll take about 5 or 8 minutes or so just to kind of show you what the client management area looks like that helps you to build these simulation-based public engagement tools. And so I just want to talk, for those of you who've been following our company for a number of years, these talking points will not look familiar because they're actually fairly new. This has been a time of challenge and growth for all of us in this country, in this world. In the last 2 years, I mean, we have thought new thoughts and confronted new realities and not just thought them, but lived them. And it's caused a lot of change. And there's been a lot of disruption. And sometimes, new and better ways have been found. Sometimes they've just been, exacerbated. The problems have been exacerbated. But we're really looking at this as an opportunity to learn and to do some things differently. And so one of the things that we're really focusing on, and I'll have to say, since we were sort of brought into this issue of housing, it's become much clearer to me. And I've been doing public engagement now for 30 years, not that whole time online, is just finding a way to transform individual complaints to community-based problem solving. And that's really what we're trying to do with our housing simulation. So often housing plans can really be derailed by some a relatively small group of very involved and sometimes angry people, and then that ends up being not good for the community. And so we're looking at a way to sort of transform and reframe that conversation. So we'll show you a little bit of that today, and Dave will sort of expound upon that a bit. But we also don't think that that's limited to housing. I think climate. I think budget, a number of different issues can benefit from that approach. That's really what we're trying to do with our tools, is to expand their usability and to have it be, saying yes to, how does the community solve a problem, as opposed to no, don't even think about doing that near my house. There, as I said earlier, there are just a lot of new changes, a lot of new realities. I think a lot of us thought that when COVID started to peter out, and we do hope it is starting to truly peter out right now, that would kind of be the end of the last big earth-shaking change, at least for a little while. But now we've got the war in Ukraine, and something that really hasn't happened in 70 years, and we're looking at disruptions of all sorts of things, new realities, new priorities at the federal level for government, international relations. I mean, there's just change is just seeming to be a bit of a constant. And so having a productive way to process those changes, to have conversations about those, is really something that we're trying to do. And we know from the comments that you all made when you signed up for this, that that's something you're looking to do too, is how to communicate change and new realities and help adjust to it. Because government, I mean, let's all be honest, government, is not the most nimble of all institutions. And especially it's not that nimble of institutions when it's got a problem or a challenge that it's trying to face that is visible and that the public might have some opinion or some reaction to. And so to have tools to be able to have that conversation in a productive, positively framed way, we think is very valuable. Another thing that we heard from you all, and this has been a challenge that we've been working on for years, and I think we're finally getting maybe a couple we've got some good examples of dealing with it, is reaching harder to reach populations and not the usual suspects. And we've got some tools, especially our budget program that we've got next week. I'll show you those in just a moment. Is just a tremendous success story where a city in California had about 1/3 of its participants being Spanish speakers, which I think is just remarkable. And honestly, it wasn't rocket science how they did it. They just kind of, they made a couple of partnerships and went out and did it door to door. And we'll show you that in a little bit more next week. The other thing that we're trying to do is that, when we first started doing our budget simulation, I think a lot of our clients, a lot of finance directors, budget directors said, "Oh, this is great," and they would put every question that was interesting to them on the simulation. And in some ways, and that's worked to a certain degree in terms of transparency. But what it hasn't done is it hasn't sort of framed up the right conversation for non-experts. And so what we're realizing is that the benefit of these simulations is focusing on trade-offs and using the tools to kind of focus people's attention, not on a management decision or administrative decision, like how much should we budget for fuel next year in the police department, or what should be the setback distance if you're looking at some kind of a zoning change, but really trying to find where are those public-facing, values informed issues, and how do we let the public make some of those trade-offs that respects a world of constraints and has context and consequences. And so that's one thing we're also really focusing on. And then this last one, those of you who have followed our company for a while, you will recognize that one, that the expectations for transparency and participation are increasing. I think transparency was maybe a buzzword that started to permeate government maybe 15, 20 years ago. And we've seen, I think, great strides in terms of transparency and making information available. Financial information in particular is just readily available for government at almost any level. But that next step is participation, is how can I interact with it? And then for you all as public administrators and elected leaders, how do you make that participation something that's positive and useful? And so once again, it's finding that right level of framing the issue so that there's a trade-off where the public's input is truly valuable, as opposed to asking them something that really is more of an administrative or managerial type of question. So these are the new challenges as we see them, and we're going to be updating these constantly. I'm not sure we're going to etch these in stone just yet, but we'd actually appreciate any feedback that any of you have on these things as well. And while I'm thinking about it, if you all do have questions, use the chat feature or use the Q&A. We've got a team of folks that are going to be watching that, and they'll sort of forward them up to whatever speaker is most best suited to share on those. And then this is a little bit of a hybrid slide. As I said, the design of this particular series of meetings is to today give kind of an overview of kind of some new tools, some new ways of thinking about public engagement, simulation-based public engagement, but then also how do they apply to some of the really important issues that local governments are dealing with. And so next week, we're actually going to be focusing on housing, budget, and climate, and we've got 3 experts. Winnie Mew focusing on housing next Tuesday. Andrew Sternfels. Winnie is from city of Orinda, California. Andrew Sternfels from city of Healdsburg, California, is going to be talking about budget. He's done really just jaw-dropping work in terms of the participation that they've seen. And then on Monday, May 9th, we'll have Gordy Bennett, who is with Milwaukee County, and he's an active member in ICLEI, which is Local Governments for Sustainability, which is an organization that we're starting to work with a little bit, and really happy about that. So if you, I think when you registered, you had the opportunity to indicate interest in any of these, but if for some reason that bypassed you or whatever, just contact us and we'll help you get connected to any one of these. You're welcome to attend one or all 3 of these. You're also welcome to invite others from your group. So if you're a budget director, for example, and housing is a big issue in your locality, send somebody from planning or housing or zoning or whatever to attend Winnie's on Tuesday and so forth. We welcome as many people who want to participate as can. And then before I sort of show you a couple of things, I want to kind of just give a couple of illustrative quotes that kind of inform those bullet points that I talked about earlier. And this is about framing the conversation at the right level. And one of the things that we've really learned, and it's just a terrible temptation that I bet many of you might have with your subject matter expertise, because you're the budget director and the budget in and out. You're the planning director and the code and the zoning, and you've got all these technical questions that are going in through your head all the time. Or you're the climate action planner and kind of what the most important details are about tons of CO2 and so forth. But what we're finding is that those really detailed questions, most of the time, most of the public will not have much to say about that that's very useful. And so what we're really trying to help both through advice, but also through the structure of the tools is to pull back a little bit and to frame the conversation at the right level. And so I love this quote from Renata Robles. She's an associate planner at the city of Lafayette, California. And they were one of the key cities that really helped us to come up with, I think, is a much better tool for housing. By helping us to see how we can add a map, sort of an interactive map to our simulation. So even our existing clients, I think most of you will not have seen that, but that's been a really cool thing that we've added in the last 8 months or so. So anyway, this is what Renata said. She said, "We don't need everybody to become experts in housing development and planning and land use decision making, but we do want to create a framework within which they can operate and have informed conversations." And then she said balancing act, was a good way to do that. And then this next one comes from a city manager in Roseville, California. And what he said is that it's almost like a sense of empathy. So it reframes the question from being about me and what I might be mad about when it comes to the budget or when it comes to housing, or maybe I don't like climate action, or maybe I'm mad at the city for not doing enough climate action, is that a simulation-based tool can almost build a sense of empathy and once again focus on those trade-offs. And so what Dominic Casey said was, Balancing Act gave our community a chance to sit in the city manager's chair and make budget decisions among all of the quality of life services we provide. People commented on how hard that role is, and that insight proved valuable in building trust. Now, you might think that this is an odd thing for a president of a software company to say, but when we've done surveys of people that have gone through our simulations, all different types of simulations, the most prominent thing that they say is that was hard. Now, fortunately, what they are not saying is that the software was hard to use. What they're saying is that a simulation built well, so that you really have to wrestle with these trade-offs, that shows that these trade-offs are not easy, and there may not even be, there isn't in most cases a perfect or a right answer, that it's hard. And that just having a public, or even as Zach will talk a little bit more, having staff, internal staff, realize how hard these decisions on is a major victory, because it means that they understand that there's not just one right answer, and when ultimately through the appropriate decision-making channels, whether it's senior administrators or elected officials make the decision, there is a group of people who have also wrestled with it. They know how hard it is, and whether it goes their way in particular or not, there's much more likely to be acceptance of whatever decision is made moving forward. And we think that's a really valuable thing. And so I'm going to not spend too much time talking about our tools, because I want to get more to Zach and Dave and let them kind of describe kind of the challenges as they see it, and the potential for a simulation-based approach to help. But these are some of the tools that we've got. I'm going to actually just demo them now, and I'm one slide ahead of myself. So let me go to my live screen share here. And I'm going to do, we've got two major tools right now. We've got a tool called Prioritize, which is the one that you see in front of you now. And then we've got the simulation, which is the one that probably most of you are more familiar with. Prioritize is new, and I have to say it's been a really fun one to be a part of, because I think people see it and they're like, wow, I get it, that makes sense, and I could actually envision my public doing it. And just parenthetically, it's also really easy to build one of these. They look great. It takes a couple hours to build one, including the visuals. So this is one that Garrett, our director of customer success, made for housing. And since then, we've got a couple that have been made live. And at some point, we'll sort of share those with you too, but they're a little bit early in terms of their usage. And so this is for housing. It's asking for your input, and so you've got your typical screen here. A lot of people have been putting videos here, like mayors of the videos of the mayor, sort of saying why public engagement is important. And one thing, just this is probably obvious to all of you, but there's been a decent amount of research about public engagement, and especially on the budget. And what we've seen is that there's a nice division of labor, that elected officials typically like to have this high quality public engagement. And public officials are usually in favor of it as well. But in terms of the division of labor, it seems like it works best when it's made by the staff, and then it's being led by the public officials. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense. But we've also seen that doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it's completely staff led, and it sort of bypasses the elected decision-making level. Or sometimes it's something that elected officials champion, but isn't really bought in by the public administrators, because they view a lot of these decisions as being more technical and managerial. And I think that there's a real sweet spot there. And I think having a simulation to kind of contain and frame that conversation can be really useful for that. Okay, so this is the new simulation, and most of you have probably seen this. We've got a way to ask a few simple questions. We've got a way to get a sense of where people are geographically without asking them their address, which is often much appreciated. And so I just put in my zip code here. And the idea here is that we just ask people to drop a pin kind of about where they live. And then we give you some nice graphics on the back end on that. And so the idea here is in this version of Prioritize is that this particular jurisdiction has a goal of 1,200 units of new housing. And so it needs to make zoning and sort of accommodations in ordinances and policy to accommodate that. And so the idea here is that they can say, okay, what if we put this zone, we looked at the North Art District as a place to put that. And so you can take a look here and you can say this would be townhomes along 18th, and then you click on this and you can actually see a map. And this is completely customizable. You can put in pictures, videos, live updating widgets if you want, all sorts of things. In this particular instance, it's just a simple map. And so if you say, okay, let's do that, let's put 210 units there. If you click it, it starts to fill the thermometer. And so it starts out at red, and by the time it gets over here, it's green. And so you can do the same thing here with the ballpark area. Oops, sorry, I clicked the comment button. And so I'm just, for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and just select these. And as you can see, it starts turning towards green up here. And then you can select City Park. And then I think this one should put us over the top. This one doesn't have a cap on it, it just has a goal. So the goal is 1,200. When you select it, it turns green. And one of our most popular features of late has been confetti. So when a goal is reached, you have the option, a checkbox that you can make on the back end to have confetti distributed throughout your simulation. People actually really love this. All right, so now I want to show you a different use of Prioritize. This has been the city of Norfolk, Virginia. They're one of our oldest and I'd say best and most innovative cities in terms of their commitment to high quality public engagement. And so they're using it for their ARPA funds. I'm just going to kind of skip through this for now. And they had a pretty substantial ARPA allotment. They had $154 million, and they've got a lot of things they could spend it on. And so what they've done, and then they've also categorized things. So I'm going to just sort of pull up a category here so it's a little bit easier to understand. And so they've got things like relocating the YMCA, and you can click on this and they describe it. And you click on this, and they've done this really nice thing where they've made tiles using Power BI, which I think is just a great tool. It shows where it is. Looks like the map isn't loading. That's not on our side, I don't think. And then a description and so forth. And you can say, okay, I understand what that would look like, and I understand where it would benefit, and I understand the cost. And I think that'd be a good thing to do. So you select it, and then you've spent $4 million. You've got 150 left. Same thing over here. Let's see if the map loads on this one. Okay, it must have been something on their side. I don't know what's going on with that, but the same idea. So I'm going to go to some of these big areas over here so you can sort of see how this goes much more quickly. Community services, transport, budget stabilization, and so forth. And then the idea here is once you get you've selected everything you want within your budget, is that you can go down to the very bottom, and then you can then prioritize what you think is the most important. And I could have done this on the housing one as well. And the idea being that you say, this is the list of projects that I would like to have in order to either meet my goal or to expend my funds, or it could be really any unit. And then I can rank order it. So I can say which is most important. And then on the back end, we give you the weighted and the unweighted results, which is really kind of cool. And then there's this one. This is climate action. This one I think is actually pretty cool too. I'm going to skip through that. In this case, there is the units are tons of CO2, and this entity has a goal of, I think by 2040 or something like that, of reducing its CO2 emissions by 100,000 tons. And so they can go here and they can say, circular economy, which is actions to promote resource reduction, reuse, et cetera. And then there's a little visual that describes what that is. And you can click this. And then this is what I really want to show you. This is one of the big public engagement challenges when it comes to climate change is that you see circular economy over here has a big impact towards meeting the goal, but what we're hearing from a lot of our clients is that, you know, there's an active group of community gardeners, for example, that think that community gardening is going to be the solution to climate change. And I think that almost everybody would, you know, who's really not in favor of community gardening. It's a fine thing. But in terms of, you know, things like community gardening and composting, its actual impact is minuscule. And so while this might be a perfectly terrific thing to do, it hardly budges, hardly moves the needle. And so other things like, you know, bulk purchase of renewables, green rental housing, building electrification, that's the kind of thing that's actually going to get you there much more quickly. And then once again, it's got the goal, so it's got the confetti. So just, you know, another use in terms of how this could look, the prioritized tool when it comes to climate. The next one I'll show you, I think I'm going to guess that most of you are already familiar with how our budget simulation works for a general fund or for a capital fund. This one I want to show you is Eagle, Idaho, and I want to show you because they were very innovative. They used our impact feature to you know, add a different level of information. But once again, it should be part of the trade-off. And so essentially, they just said, you know, this that when you build a capital project, you shouldn't just think that that's the end of the expense that's associated with it. And so what they did is for all of these possible projects, like the First Street Festival, they describe what that is, and there's a nice picture, and it looks lovely. They say, okay, if you want to include it, that's great. So they're basically starting with a budget of $10 million. They're saying, go ahead and include it, but you know what? We are going to add 5% as an ongoing maintenance fee. So it's saying, okay, you know, let's be thoughtful about what we do here. And some of these items have that fee, like this one does not, and some of them do. And so you'll see some of them impact this and this, and some of them only impact this. So this impact feature can be used for maintenance. It can be used for you know, some measurement of equity. It can be used for, it's completely customizable. And you know, we're I'm not going to say sad is too strong of a word, but we actually think this is a really powerful way to use the impact feature, is to show that double impact on issues where it's important enough to kind of, you know, think about what that secondary impact would be. The next one also uses the impact feature, and this one's for climate. This is the first time that our tools were ever used for climate. And the idea, this was with the state of Arizona, and it was for Volkswagen Settlement Fund. So some of you might remember that a few years ago, Volkswagen was caught doing something nefarious with the way that emissions were being counted. And so they needed to pay a pretty significant amount of money to each of the states. So this was the state of Arizona. And so the state of Arizona had $51 million that it could use for mitigation projects. And so there's a whole list of possible mitigation projects that this money could be expended upon, including school buses. So you can click on this and you can kind of learn about that and learn some details and kind of see, you know, the classes of vehicles and things like that. And what's different about this is over here is the basic budget balance, but over here they've set it up so that each of these choices impacts both the balance, but also impacts, you know, the tons of nitrous oxides that would be saved. And so they actually had a target. They provide a lot of information on this, and they had a target. And so, for example, this is loaded with a staff recommendation, and so it's coming in with, you know, 344 new buses, with new diesel buses, not electric buses, at $37.9 million. Some people may say, well, I think we ought to be doing electric, and so let's free up a little bit of money for that. So let's only do 172 new diesel. So now we've got this 19 million bucks, but we're now below our target in terms of nitrous oxides reductions. If you go down here and take your 19 million bucks, well, it looks like you can get 68 electric school buses. You click on that, and you're overspent by just a little bit, but you're actually, you know, significantly below the goal that you're trying to reach in terms of nitrous oxides reduction. And so this, to me, is actually a really nice example of a values trade-off, where you know, on the one hand, if our value is, you know, maximizing this number and making this as high as possible, then, you know, we probably should be, you know, doing this and you know, using the new diesel school buses because they're a lot less expensive. But if we want to sort of usher in a new era of change that, you know, makes use of electric vehicle technology, well, maybe we invest in this, even though in the short term it gets this number a little bit lower. So once again, I think it does a really nice job of framing what that trade-off is in a non-technical way so that people can provide some input. The next one I want to show you, and it's really going to be the last one, I think. And I think I may have grabbed the wrong one here. Excuse me. Is this it? And it's not, sorry. It's this one. This one is it. Okay, this is Lafayette, California. This is for their housing element, their housing plan. And they are, they put a nice little video here. Let me skip through here. And then essentially what they've said is, okay, we have a goal of 2,000 new housing units. And this goal actually, in this case, comes from a process derived from the state where they've got their goal. So they describe what that is. And then down here, they say, and if you want to add more, you can. But the really important part is that they've connected the map to the choices over here. And so what I can do is I can click on the map and I say, okay, I'd like to see about maybe adding some housing to this area 1 right here. And then you move to that, and it tells you that area 1 currently has 139 units of housing and at 35 housing units per acre. And so if you want to increase that, you can. So you increase it and they can set the increment. And as you increase it, it goes up and you can see the total number goes here. And this area gets darker and this number starts to get smaller. And that's kind of the key thing. And then you can also say, well, what about, putting some in this area 9 over here? There might be a lot of opportunity there. And indeed you can, because you can actually go much faster there because it's got some different characteristics. So this number gets fast, it gets larger, bigger, and it moves this down. So I'm just going to show you as you get closer to that. Currently, it says you do not have a housing plan. And this is what these public administrators like so much, is it enforces a constraint. So it doesn't, people can't just go in and say, not that house or not that development or not that site or just, only, put housing far from me. Unless you actually solve the challenge and meet the total number, the submit button will not allow you to submit. And so the idea here is that you do not have a housing plan until you've gotten over the finish line. And it says you have a housing plan, and then you're welcome to submit. And this is actually, I think, been really transformative of the way that that housing plans work, because it just reframes the issue as a community goal as opposed to what an individual doesn't want. And it really gives people a way to say yes to something, as opposed to the way that a lot of public engagement is structured, which is kind of complaint driven, which is just where they say no. And the last thing I'm going to show you, because I think it's a nice segue, it'll prep for Zach, although Dave is going to be the first speaker, is just to show you something. This is one of our favorite clients. This is Syracuse City School District in New York. This is the CFO, Suzanne Slack. And she's been a real pioneer in using the tool internally. And actually, I'll just say a lot of our school districts clients have been using the tool internally. I think in some parts because there's a large professional group, i.e. teachers, that often feel like they're not really aware of some of these budget decisions. So it's a really nice tool to include a large group of professionals in thinking through some of these budget issues. And she's found it to be really useful. I'm not going to spend too much time on these quotes, but she talks about letting people know how much things actually cost. It makes her job easier because she's not a person. Most people are not the type of people that always want to say no. And this actually lets people understand for themselves why the right answer might be no. Because if you say no to one thing, it lets you say yes to what's most important. She talks about people feeling better once they've sort of understood the trade-offs and so forth. And then she also talks about it gives leverage to make changes. And that's one thing that GFOA is really encouraging through its rethinking budgeting process right now is to not be so beholden to the previous year's budget. And I think that that's really a powerful thing. I want to show you just 2 more pictures, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dave Driscoll. This is so she was using in this picture, she's using meeting mode. So it's a real-time function to use the tool. And it's actually, I think it's one of the coolest things we have, and hopefully we'll be doing more face-to-face meetings. But what happens is that when people provide input on the simulation, there's a facilitator screen, and that actually shows the results. And so that's what makes it different from just a regular session of Balancing Act. And then this is an example of using it on Zoom. This was a very innovative city of Tacoma, Washington, that said, you know what, we're not going to let COVID prevent our residents from understanding what's going on, especially because this particular year, this was 2020, when sales tax supported entities were just in a world of hurt. They had a big problem that they needed to work through with the residents. And rather than just keeping it close to the vest, they said, you know what, we're going to share that we are $67 million in the red based on our downturn and revenue projections. We're going to let residents help us figure out what to do with that. All right, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave Driscoll. As I said, to me, he's a very inspiring and knowledgeable public servant, and he's going to talk a little bit about kind of the public engagement challenges of housing, and then touch upon climate a little bit, and how having some tools like this might ease some of the pressure and help to come up with some better solutions on it. So Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And hi, everybody. I'm going to share a few slides. I just want to talk a bit about sort of, my thinking on Balancing Act as a tool that's part of a larger sort of community engagement strategy and community conversation. Those of you who work in local government, let's see if I can find where did my files go? Okay, here it is. Hold on.
It's such a good picture. I was hoping you could show it.
I think I got it. So those of you who work in local government, are you seeing this?
Yes.
Okay. I've seen this guy. You've met him. So
we're not seeing the guy though.
You're not seeing the guy.
We're seeing a Word document.
Okay, well, that's not what I want to show. I'm sorry, I've got two screens going here. I'm not in my usual setup.
Here we see table of contents.
That's not what we want. Where's my stuff? Sharing that. Okay, let's try this one more time. If not, we'll go to another. Select that. Now?
There, that guy.
Okay, there's that guy. I've met him a few times working in local government on contentious issues. And I think there's just sort of, I wanted to set the context a little bit of sort of, we do this work, we're using this tool. These are really hard conversations. There's a lot of emotion in the room. And I think one of the values of the Balancing Act. Okay, I just got some text on my screen. I'm like in closed caption. Maybe that's what's going on. Turn that off. Anyway, how do you think about Balancing Act as a way to sort of shift the conversation? I think a lot of what Chris is talking about is like you're giving this different way of engaging in a kind of technical exercise where we as planners, policymakers are charged with coming up with a plan that has a lot of technical information behind it. We're talking about units and we're talking about greenhouse gas reductions and things that people don't connect to. They just see this as a conversation that's about changing the world that they live in, changing the neighborhood that they love. And I think one of the things as a practitioner doing community engagement, I believe in community engagement, is sort of how do you capture that passion people have about the place they live, the place they love, and channel it into something that is that sort of collaborative problem solving mode. And I think that's a big part of the value that a Balancing Act tool brings. And I just want to talk a little bit about sort of thinking about this as a tool within the broader community engagement and sort of making sure you're thinking comprehensively about an engagement process within which you're using the Balancing Act tool. So Chris brought it up. I mean, most community engagement we hear from the people we kind of know on a first name basis because they show up at every workshop and every council meeting. And how do we use this as an opportunity to reach those that are harder to reach? And I think of this within the context of partnerships, ongoing partnerships with community organizations who work with lower income groups, or partnering with business community to also engage people who are in commuting who don't live in the neighborhoods that we're looking to create housing in, so that they can live closer into their jobs. So there's different strategies you can use, and your community about what works, but I definitely want to underscore that. In fact, just yesterday I was in a meeting where a group of community organizations that were reaching out to get their input on the housing plan that we're currently doing, were basically pushing back and like, you guys only come to us when you're doing your plan and you need us so you can check the box for the state and show that you did your inclusive engagement. Like, what happens in between the 8 years when you're not doing your housing plan? So, how do we create those kind of ongoing relationships and not a one-off transactional kind of engagement? And that's hard to do. I totally acknowledge that, but sort of thinking about your larger sort of engagement infrastructure, I think is really important in terms of making sure those voices are heard on an ongoing basis and you're building partnerships. The Balancing Act tool helps people understand trade-offs. To me, that trade-off conversation is really important. to helping understand values. Like those are the things that hopefully there's some greater commonality around sort of what defines us as a community. And this gets into the fifth point there, which is like, this is a conversation about the kind of community we want to be. This is about people, about lives, about livelihoods, about our children, about our future. And while the Balancing Act tool is going to help us count units, and you have to come up with a plan for the units, or you have to come up with a plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, that's not what the conversation is really about. The conversation is about our community. And so how do you connect the dots between this as an exercise to get to a housing plan, this as an exercise to get to a greenhouse gas reduction? What does that mean for me as a person in a community? So connecting the dots between jobs, essential workers, equity concerns, segregation, climate change, and sort of these things, that these decisions we're making in a housing plan is challenging, but it's really important for framing the conversation as you then introduce Balancing Act as a tool. Really important to have feedback loops, that people get involved in these things, they give you their input, and then oftentimes, too oftentimes, they don't hear like, okay, what happened with that? So being able to like feedback to people, okay, we did this Balancing Act tool, we heard from X number of people, here's what they said, here's the nature of the conversation we had, and here's the plan that's responding to what we heard. And the last piece, I like the confetti, like even if it's a small little thing that you can do. And I think one of the cool things about Balancing Act is it's kind of fun to do. It's kind of fun to play around with. And oftentimes our engagement work feels a little laborious to people who participate. So ways in which you can introduce sort of more fun and interactivity is great. And I think that's one of the great things about the Balancing Act tool. And I always think of engagement, it's really structuring a conversation. So, you know, not getting too caught up on the tool as the thing, but sort of how does the tool help us structure a conversation in which we're hearing difference of perspective and trying to find some common ground, or if we, you know, we disagree, that it's based on disagreement on substance, not just based on, well, you're a renter and I'm a homeowner, therefore we're not going to agree. So those are just some thoughts about, sorry, I'm like struggling with my screens here. How to think about Balancing Act and within that larger engagement structure. And I just want to acknowledge, like, if you're working in this space, a lot of communities, it's really hard. There's a lot of contention, a lot of emotion, and these are some things I think you can do to help bring the temperature down a bit and have sort of a meaningful conversation about your community's future.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate that. And if you have questions for Dave, go ahead and put them in chat, and we'll try to return to those at the end. And I just want to echo something that you said, which is that this is so Balancing Act. The company that created Balancing Act came out of a public policy and public engagement facilitation firm. And so really we created this budget simulator, the first budget simulation, because of our frustration about how difficult it is to talk about budgets. And so we really view it as a facilitation tool. And the key to a successful discussion when you're facilitating something, I think most facilitators would agree, is framing it properly. And so what the simulation tool can do, it can frame it. We also have seen it used very skillfully as a leadership tool, whether it's a leadership tool by public administrators, or I think maybe even more appropriately and more importantly, a leadership tool among elected officials, because they're the ones that ultimately face a lot of the blowback and the pressure, the direct pressure from residents. So very much appreciate all that. All right, Zach, I see that you've turned your camera on, so thank you so much. So once again, Zach is as a veteran of Maricopa County, one of the largest local governments in the country, and then he was the budget officer in Marion, Iowa, and he reached out to us. I think he might have seen the first article in the GovTech that came out when we launched in 2015, and we've been having a great conversation ever since about the various uses and how this can change and hopefully benefit the work of budget officers, but also organization in general, and then even the overall goals of a public entity. So Zach, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And actually, it's great that I'm coming right after David today, because David set the stage really well. One of the things that I found in the world of budget engagement, working within a county structure than a city structure, it really is how do you structure those conversations and look at budgetary design not solely as a afterthought or an emblem that we place on the end of our budget, but rather something that gets us to really rethinking our budget process, drawing from that term that being used throughout today, GFO is really pushing us towards. And today I'm going to bring the narrative of how my understanding of internal budget engagement, rethinking budgeting, came through a valiant budgeteer starting at Maricopa County, me, myself, freshly minted out of grad school, public policy, ASU, and really the trajectory over time of how it's changed my thinking of how do we go about public engagement to have a more genuine process, and a process that really meets the ends of what it's looking for, of bringing the public into the conversation and changing the way that we allocate funds for the betterment of the public good. So going back to, as Chris mentioned, about 2015, I'd been in the budget office in Maricopa County for a couple of years and looking for a way of how can we improve the county's budget process. And I was really excited with what Balancing Act brought to the table, as what's already aforementioned in the simulations that everyone's looked at. But unfortunately, after I had placed together a kind of a litany of defense on why I think this would be a great tool for Maricopa County and how to move it forward, Maricopa County overall is a, just to put in context, it's a county that represents, it's the fourth largest county in the nation, represents at that time 4.3 million people. So a lot of people potentially to engage in that process. And the county itself has always been known as somewhat risk adverse. So they said, Zach, sounds like a great idea. Unfortunately, I don't think this is the year or the next 4 years that followed that to move forward with Balancing Act. What we did end up doing is we did end up doing two things. We did a citizens budget, as well as we did a resident survey. And the reason I'm bringing that up during a simulation for Balancing Act discussion is because I believe Maricopa County understood that there was a need to reinvigorate the process of Maricopa County. Also, I should add another layering of the county itself. Maricopa County is seen as one of the best in practice, especially at that time in the early, when I started the budget office in 2011, because they had fully vetted strategic business plans across the organization, as well as activity-based budgeting. So for you finance directors and folk out there, we had the activity level costs across the entire book of business for the county. So not estimates, but actuals as well as budgets. So we were further along than most in or having a good amount of data together to put together some pretty interesting simulations. But unfortunately, we weren't ready as an organization to move into the engagement process. We were really still sitting at the outside of the inform or educate the public on the IEP2 spectrum of public engagement. So around 2018, I took a job in Marion, Iowa. Our family wanted to move to a smaller jurisdiction, and we did. And there was a great opportunity to start a budget office in the city manager's office. The city manager was gung-ho on moving forward on Balancing Act. However, he said, Zach, you got my buy-in, go build it with the department directors. So I had a meeting, all department directors thinking once they see Balancing Act in action, seeing the other jurisdictions that had utilized it, immediately they're all going to say, wow, this is great. Please, let's go forward as an organization. It's really going to move us ahead. That's not what happened. There was a lot of arm crossing, a lot of people moving backwards, and then only took one or two individuals to start talking about the negatives that come across or that can potentially happen when you do budget engagement. Namely, the two that stick out the most in my mind is one, we're only going to hear negatives from the public if we engage them in the process. Why do it? And then secondly, is this representative? The process, are we doing random samplings of who are collecting information on? How are we able to make sure that this is representative of the entire community? I was crushed. I thought this was the end of what I thought would be a great opportunity to get for myself to delve into Balancing Act as a practitioner. But then thanks to Chris put me in touch with the city of Raleigh. The city of Raleigh, it's similarly, as they were looking to move forward, how they were going to move forward their simulation, they decided to go internal first. So they started with staff to use it as an education tool for staff for some of the reasons that were aforementioned today, making sure staff fully understood where budgets are allocated and really build an understanding internally of what budget engagement could be before bringing it out to the public. So I brought that up as a secondary option for the next year, and everyone was in agreement. So this will lead us to, I want to really spend the majority of time talking about how that engagement worked out for the city of Marion. So what we did is we used the standard budget simulation, and oh, sorry, saw a message from Chris making sure it wasn't for me. We used the budget simulation tool that I think a number of you are familiar with. And what we did is we put the prior year's budget in there, and then we had just started the previous year budget justification. So for anyone not in the budget world, what that is, it's a way for the budget office to ask departments where those additional dollars they're asking for in the new year will be allocated to, and then how those will benefit the public. So kind of the twofold, what are the dollars, and then what are the benefits underneath those. And I should mention that's a really key step for Marion. Marion didn't have that prior to myself coming on board. And why that was so important is similar to the Balancing Act itself. If you put the Balancing Act budget out to the public or internally, and you don't talk about what the change is going to be, what the benefit or what the change is going to benefit in the public, you're really not able to deduce from the public increasing police department budget by 4% or decreasing Parks and Rec by 3%. What does that really mean? What types of services are they looking to change? So that context really helped us internally move through the process. We also paired them together in, we did a meeting style setup. So we had about 12 12 department directors, and put them in groups of 4. So we had 3 separate groups, and we made them balance the budget. And really speaking to what Dave said so eloquently is, the budget itself is a conversation. Every year as you look at the budget, though we may work from incremental budgeting, the idea that the previous year's budget is what we're going to start from, and then we're just going to be additive, plus or minus a little bit. It really is an opportunity for reflection as to how well did we meet the goals we had for the previous year, and where do we need to put our resources this next year in order to carry out certain goals and expectations in the community. In doing that, it was a great activity. First off, as from the budget office, we're always glad to hear when individuals say, I didn't know how hard your job was, or I didn't know how hard it was for the city manager to come up with these. And it really is. When you're talking about a budget across the jurisdiction, Marion's budget was much smaller, only about $100 million budget. Maricopa County was $4.3 billion. So when you're trying to contextualize that, externally or internally, it's very difficult for people. And these were the feedback from staff internal to the organization that had some difficulties there understanding it. One of the other pieces that came out was our fire chief is very direct and said, hey, how am I supposed to make sense of this if no one put any information about what they're expected to have happen with these dollars? One of the things that we did is we used the information bubbles in there to have people look at how well they were going to what the justifications were, and what that would mirror in the real world is to understand if the public the same way is going to make decisions on your budget, how much information are you providing them in order to contextualize, as David mentioned earlier, where those dollars are going to be used, and what are the pinch points on why we're looking at this for new engagement for the government or for the jurisdiction in that area. At the end of the process, everyone was able to balance their budget. We even had a truck that was swapped from the police department into the parks department, finding out that really there wasn't the unneeded truck in one area would benefit the other side. A couple of takeaways I had from the internal process is, first and foremost, is when you're going through budget engagement, it is think of it more as a marathon. It really is a process change. It's really a change management. So if you think about it, that you're going to, in 1 year, you're going to be able to arrive at all the goals that you previously had. Your process is probably going to be rather shallow, and it's not going to reach the depths of the organization. So I recommend starting as a budget or start as change management process, and then also start with your internal staff. One of the things that I found in the city of Marion is if we would have gone forward without engaging staff, they wouldn't have fully understood what we were putting before the public, and they wouldn't have had ownership of what they collect for it. A reminder to individuals too that if you haven't worked in the budget office, each department is the one, or the budget request for the organization starts at the department level. So really data collection and public engagement is something that starts at the department level. So it's one of the things that I didn't think about prior to this process is if we don't bring along line level staff, if we're truly going to make public engagement a part of the ethos of your organization, if it's really a value you want to incorporate into it, you have to engage all sectors of your organization. One of the other areas is the availability of resources. GFOA, as they're looking to reinventing budgeting, one of the reasons behind that, as they mentioned, or two of the reasons. One, budgets need to be more agile to address current problems. But secondly, is if we do incremental budgeting, the majority of the budgets are in the prior year's allotment or where they land for a previous year. The difficulty becomes moving forward is you only have, say, 2 to 3% on a good year of new dollars to play with. So if you're not engaging staff in that process, the future budgeting will require us to retinker budgets and to reallocate resources differently in order to meet the changing needs of our communities. And one of the ways I like remembering that is thinking through the definition of innovation. Innovation itself isn't merely adding new resources, but the recoupling of existing resources. One of the other areas that really helped Marion is to reinforce the performance management process. Marion had recently gone through a strategic planning process where we assigned performance measures to each of our goal areas and strategies to make sure that we are to articulate how we were going to accomplish those and to know what degree we're actually meeting those goals. And going through this process help department directors understand the justification needs with data, and also looking at this from an evaluative perspective. Budgeting itself, in the future of budgeting, we're looking at it in order to move resources and think about the best utilization of them. We're really going to have to be able to evaluate how well are we utilizing what we currently have. So I'd recommend that an internal public engagement process helps move you into that public management piece. And then lastly, I wanted to mention that it built buy-in for our city manager. When he put together the budget, it was much easier for him to get staff on board with it because they had been part of the process. So as you're looking to think about a public engagement process, I'd recommend looking not just at the external engagement, but really internally, what changes should be made to your budget process and to the different budget touch points you have in your organization to make sure you're looking at a full vetted redesign process when you look to have these conversations through Balancing Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. That was terrific. And as I said, I think most people probably know Balancing Act as being a public engagement tool for budgets. And so that's what we spent the least amount of time talking about today. But really, I'm starting to see it. I think GFOA was very smart to look at the upheaval that COVID caused for local government and say, here's an opportunity for us to make some changes. And so they're really rethinking some of the fundamentals of that. And Zach has really tied some of what Balancing Act can do as a tool to take advantage of a lot of those new directions. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more from Zach. And Zach is actually going to start working with us in a number of ways. And if anybody would like to have further conversation with him, let me know and we'll try to connect you. For now, though, I just chatted with Garrett offline, and I don't think we have time to have a little bit of a peek behind the hood just to kind of see how to build Balancing Act. But I guess but the good news is that we have these 3 sessions next week in which we do have time for him to show you in reasonable amount of depth how to build a simulation. One thing I just like to convey to people is that budgets can be, or simulations can be complex. They don't always have to be, but we have really taken great pains to make the way that you control them and build them to be very simple and straightforward as possible for something that does have some complexity to it. So that might be that I just gave you an oxymoron. I apologize for that. If you want to actually see how that looks, come back and join us for at least one of our sessions next week. So you should have on your screen right now the housing session that we're going to have. It's going to feature Winnie Mew from City of Orinda, California. Budget is going to be Andrew Sternfels from City of Healdsburg, and he's got, as I said, he's just got some terrific stories to tell and experience to tell and evidence that you actually can reach some of these harder to reach populations, especially when you partner with community-based organizations and you're willing to go a little bit of the extra mile, even if there's a language barrier. And then Gordy Bennett, who's a sustainability director for City of Milwaukee, or excuse me, Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. Really a great portfolio of work that he's got going on, and he'll kind of share what some of his challenges are, both internally and externally. If you have any questions, please reach out to Garrett. I know you didn't really get a chance to communicate with Garrett too much on this call, but you'll get more of him next week. And it's just Garrett@abalancingact.com. If you want to ask a colleague from a different department, if your budget and your climate director might benefit from this, or your housing director or a planner, please ask them to join in. We'll make this video available to people so that if they want to watch it so they can catch up, they can. They can also just jump right in next week. So once again, on behalf of all of us here at Balancing Act and Zach and Dave, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to staying in touch and learning about what kind of challenges you're seeing, and if we can help come up with some strategies to address it, we're all in. So all right, thanks everybody. Bye.